listeners, welcome to Thinking Well. I'm Tom.
And I'm Kyle. And as promised, we have a special guest with us this week. He has a heavy law enforcement background, has been the head pastor of Lake Worth Baptist Church for almost 7 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Zac Hatton.
How's everybody doing?
What's up, Zach?
I'm doing great, Zac.
Hello. What a cool forum.
We're happy. We're happy you're here.
It's good to see you guys.
Yeah. Good to get together and do this all together. It's going to be, I'm looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to it like all week.
I always look forward to Friday nights, but this was a special one.
Oh.
We're looking forward to having Zac on, and I think there's just so much knowledge and wisdom, right? That I think we can learn, and especially our listeners can take from this conversation. But I guess we'll kind of get right into it, right? I mean, last week we teased that we would be going over the truth nugget segment of why the Bible, and we will get to that. That'll be hopefully later in the conversation. But when we were starting this, and and Tom would agree, we wanted to also engage in some of the current events that are happening in our world. I think as Christians, it's important to understand what's happening and be able to answer some tough questions about what's happening. So, we talked about it offline, but I think we're going to try to tackle the mass shootings topic.
Yeah, we just had that one in Allen here. What was it, a week ago now?
Yeah, about 2 weeks. Yeah,
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Just tragic. I mean, I was reading about it this week, and just whole families wiped out in this one. I think it's really difficult when you see things like that to just look at it and know how to talk about it, know what to say about it when you're asked. Because as Christians, I mean, you'll get those questions like, "Why do you think this stuff is happening?" And uh, there are answers to those questions, and while they may not be the perfect answer, and while they surely aren't an answer to try to smooth things over or desensitize people to things, I think that it is something that we can talk about. And one of the things, I think one of the biggest questions that I hear when stuff like this happens is, why do we think that this type of violence just continues to happen? Is there reasoning behind it? Why does it just seem to be escalating and continuing to happen? I was looking up some statistics this week, and there's just, you look, and from 2019, and largely due to everybody being kind of closed in with COVID and stress being really high, everywhere I looked, the numbers are kind of iffy. Some people will report one number, and then other people are like three times that. But across the board, the consensus is that shootings in general, whether mass or individual, doubled in 2020 compared to the previous year. And when we look at that, I think it's not just a mass shooting thing. It's a violence thing that we're seeing an increase in. It's not, mass shootings happen to be part of that violence, but when it goes up in general across the board, almost double when you put people in closer places, and emotions and stress that are running high. Um, it's a really difficult question to answer. Zach, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me say, when you said that we should never be desensitized, I think you're exactly right. If there should be anybody that knows about how to comfort in this time, if there is anybody who can identify with human dignity and loss and being able to empathize with people and become unsensitized. Well, let me back up. Be in a way that we're not desensitized. Excuse me. To these situations, it should be a Christian. And so I'm glad that you said that. And this is a call to obviously look at the violence, understand that it's not right, and really kind of pray for those people. Uh, we should be praying for the families. We should be praying for healing. Um, if we're talking about what we're looking at in terms of the multiplying of violence, honestly, I see people drifting further and further away from God. I see uh, I see a greater secularization. People unable to identify with God or understand the purpose of God. Um, and so the further that we drift away, the necessarily the greater compound of evil that you're going to see. I know that sounds a little probably primitive or like oversimplistic, but the further that you drift, man, there's all kinds of things that happen. It's like
Well,
it's like you become your own god, and so you're looking for a deity. It's like you take God out of the equation, you don't worship nothing. You start
right.
to worship something. You start to worship yourself. You start to worship um, I don't know, popularity. You start to worship culture. I mean, like it. Just take your pick. You will worship something, and then when you do, it becomes really, really empty, and it becomes really, really dark. And what you see, like in the multiplying of evil, is just people becoming unmoored from anything of substance that could hold them down. Who's to say that life has any kind of worth if you take God out of the equation? Who's to say that people have value? Who's to say that you matter? Who's to say that you can't? I don't know. Take out entire families. It's horrid. But that's what happens when you take God out of the equation of your life. It gets really dark and it gets really evil. And uh, and the more people that are just given to that way, man, you're going to see it. You're going to see a multiplying of violence.
Well, I think that's it's so true when you look at the world around us. How can we sit here and just devalue life in general? It doesn't matter how you were made, you can change that. It doesn't matter. You're not the way that God intended you to be. And when you devalue a person's just core morals and core sense of self, well, then they can be injured by anything because they don't have a foundation of what type of person they are or what humanity is. So if they can be injured by anything, then they can lash out at that injury in any manner that they see fit. Because we're not telling people you're accountable to your community and you're accountable to God. And the reason that you're accountable to your community is because they're all image bearers of God. And there are ways that you treat people, and what we're seeing in the world today, this isn't how you treat people.
Right.
And when that just kind of exponentially grows, you're going to have those people who are affected by it differently than other people are affected, because when they when you look and they lash out in those ways, it's because they've kind of closed themselves off from that normalcy, even the normalcy of community. um, so why would a sense of God matter, and when you look
Right.
at somebody like
Well,
that?
yeah, I'd say unmoored. You're unmoored from everything. The
Yeah.
true, the lovely, the beautiful. Everything gets dark. You have no shining light. You have no guiding principles. You have no structure. You have no system tethering you down. There's no restraining. You just go. You just it's impulsive. It's animalistic.
Whimsical.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, and can you imagine you put whimsical with violence? It's really kind of anything goes. I mean, if I was going to look in scripture, I mean, like this is what like you would see in Genesis 6. This is what you would see in Genesis 11. This is
Mhm.
what you would see in the book of the Judges. That everyone does that which is right in their own eyes. It's untenable for society. It's untenable, and so the more that this happens, the more you get individuals. Well, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters, and it almost becomes nihilistic. Actually, not almost becomes. That's exactly what it
Yeah.
becomes. It becomes nihilistic in its approach. And uh, here's the really dark side. Usually, people in darkness want other people to feel their pain.
Mhm.
And I want you to feel what I feel.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's talk about that sense of community. I think Tom said it, but it's kind of what they, in a roundabout, dark way, what they achieve. They want, they feel a certain way. They feel a certain negative, hateful way, and they want others to feel that way.
Sure.
And it's almost like you can't escape the way that God designed us. He designed us to be community driven, to have relationships, and
And worship.
right. And when
Yeah.
you take that away,
Sure.
you're still going to strive for those things.
Right.
But if you choose to have God away from that equation, this is where it ends up. The entropy, this is where it ends up.
How twisted then that view becomes to where, oh well, I still need this sense of community, to your point, but I'm going to bring everybody to my community. I'm going to bring everybody to my community of misery and hate and just this evil feeling that I have. I want everybody to feel what I
Yeah.
feel.
And or I want to matter, and I want to matter my way.
Yeah.
Right.
I want people to know my name my way.
Hmm.
And isn't that just heart wrenching?
It absolutely is. I mean, there's, I don't know when the last time you guys like just sat down and just cried. Like I think as men, it's like you just don't, like I don't really find reasons to cry often, right? But I mean, there's definitely, I think, looking at Body Cam, I think it was Nashville, the one before this, the big last one. They released Body Cam footage, and I watched it. And as a parent, right, you're looking at this, and you're thinking this could be my daughter's school
Easily. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could happen
easily.
anywhere.
And it's just, I mean, I can't get through it, and I just find myself angry, and I can't help but to cry every
Well,
time.
and one of the things, I'm glad you mentioned that too. One of the things that I've noticed, like you see across the board, the suspects in these cases, uh, virtually nothing in common. There's no theme. They didn't know each other. And then if you look in the news, another thing that you'll find is these individuals, like news casters and people in the comments, they're asking, what's the motive? Why did they do it? I mean, like we're obsessed. Well, maybe if I knew why, maybe if there was some weird explanation that would somehow give and make this make sense. Well, the biblical worldview answers that it's not going to make sense. The biblical worldview is that the heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it?
Mhm.
Like we're trying to look for something that it is unknowable. Like when you give yourself to this, when you give yourself to your own deity or whatever you want to call it, I mean that's what it would be theologically. But if you want to slap a I don't know psychological term on it, sociological term on it, asocial violence term on it, to me that's irrelevant. It is just you playing God and you making your own rules. You are the taker of life. You couldn't give it, but you sure can take it. Um, and you're trying to find a reason for it. You're not going to find a reason for it. It's we're broken. It's all brokenness.
No, I think you're absolutely right. When I watch body cam footage or read, or even like Uvalde, right? When they went through the timeline, I looked at some of the timeline of that, and that's a whole separate conversation we can have. But it's I think as human beings, and maybe men particularly, I think we try to find reason. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
things that right.
rationalization.
It's a
Yeah,
foundation. I think
like
of who
there has to be a reason for it.
right, and I think you're absolutely right. I think you can search, but you're just not going to find it. It doesn't exist. The answer, the reason is we live in a sin cursed world, and there's evil, pure evil that exists out there.
Yeah, out there and in us.
Right.
That's true.
It's when we as a community and socially kind of mature people look at stuff like that, we try to make sense of it because we're trying to find a way to relate to how could they do this, who did them this wrong that would make them react in this way. And
That's a
in our
good point
minds
too.
we're trying to associate with, well, what would drive them to this? Well,
Yeah.
a well-rounded, socially adept person who has never sought after those kind of things, or they come from a grounded family, and not that all these people come from unhinged families. People are people in and of theirself. You can People can turn around and try to blame this in their past or this in their past. At the end of the day, you've made a decision on your own.
Sure.
But we try to associate that and pick out what was wrong in
Yeah,
their life
what
that
went
caused them to
wrong?
do that. Well, what was wrong in their life that caused them to do that? What was wrong in society that we haven't equipped these people to not feel these things and to not think these things? Where's the gap in the community around them and the communities that we're trying to foster that isn't allowing them to latch on to this sense of morality and this God-given sense of respect for life? Well, we're not teaching God anymore.
Yeah.
And because we're not teaching God anymore in our communities, it's easy to kind of just let that stuff fall by the wayside.
Well, it's definitely the product. That's what you're left with, right? When you take God out of the family, right? You take God out of society, and a godless society leads to people making their own rules on what's valuable when it comes to human life and their own morality or the lack thereof. And like I said before, you're left exactly what we see.
Mm-hmm. Do we think one of the other things I hear a lot in some of the questions I read, do you think we can expect this to happen more frequently? I mean, you look at, like you said, Zach, and the times of Noah and just things like that. Is there going to be an increase in this? Do we think it's going to reach a point where it kind of peters off and then comes back again?
I think you'll see hot spots.
Okay.
Let me clarify what I mean by that. And I'm gonna even herald back to something that you said. So help me, guys, stay on track. You know how my mind can get. You were talking about
That's why we
environment.
have you here.
We were talking about environment. That's what you were really getting at.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were searching for a reason in environment, because if somebody goes wrong, it was something that happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you look and you'll see like the storytelling methods that we have now are changing. Like Cruella de Vil, like the new ones.
Mm-hmm.
The reason she's evil is because she had evil imposed upon her.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason. And like story changing, the story tactics have been changing, because obviously if somebody ends up in a bad way, that's the reasoning that we're trying to find. It's because something was imposed upon them that was outside of the control, because nobody's just inherently evil. Well, no, the Bible comes back and says we are evil from conception.
Yeah.
And so we have a better answer. And so when they're looking, like, what's the reason? What's the reason? Maybe there was something outside of them. No, not at all. It was always inside of them, and they just fed it. They fed it. Now, you asked me if we could expect to see more of this. I wrote an article. Man, I don't know. It had to have been a couple of years ago. And the title of it was, "Is it us? Or is it our fault?" I think that's what it was. And it was really based upon Paul's instructions to Timothy, that what you can expect to see from the last days, that truce breakers, deceitful, lovers of self more than lovers of God. I'd have to put my eyes on that to not butcher it completely. I would just be speaking out of my own memory, and that's not a good thing in that kind of context. But the title was, "Is it our fault?" And here's the basic premise of the article was when God's people don't step up, that's when the evil steps in. And so when I say hot spots, I mean like there's going to be some gospel preaching, gospel centered individuals that by their own sheer passion of what it means to win a community, what it means to engage a community, what it means to win a heart, you will see the gospel doing exactly what it should, because when we do our job, guess what? God does his job. He will bring the power to that situation. He's not going to let his gospel fail. But the less that we do, the more it compounds.
Hmm.
And so I say hot spots because there's going to be some on fire places, but as God's people dwindle out, that's when evil will multiply. The church, people of churches, we're like a thermometer. Well, maybe what is the one that we're like a thermostat? Yeah, that's what we are. We can raise the heat of the culture, or we can bring it way down by our inaction.
Hmm.
And what we want to do is we want to turn it up hot, and so we act like a moral conscience to our community, and that's what we want to be for our community here. We want to be a moral conscience for our community, and in that sense, we become, through God's power, we become like a restrainer, a restraining agent for an individual. We become their conscience about what goodness is, what the true is, what the beautiful is, what the right is. We become the example. You are the outward manifestation of who Christ is. And the better we are at doing that in our churches, so let's get out of Lake Worth, and who is ever listening to this, the better job we do in our sphere of influence, the more you will find people wanting to do right around you. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been speaking around somebody and they know you're a Christian and then they use a curse word, which I think is really, really, it's kind of funny. I was going to say silly, but really it's funny. I understand it. And then they look at you and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
What I mean, like, and we look at it and we're like, come on. I mean, like, I'm not your judge. I'm not God. You're not gonna have to answer to me.
Right. It
I'm
doesn't
like,
offend me.
I don't. Yeah, I don't have little baby ears. You're
Right.
okay. But what is that telling you, though?
You're inflicting change.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You're their moral conscience.
Yeah.
They are afflicted when you're around. They change their behavior when you're around. Now, let me. That's a microcosm. Let me get you to cast your mind. Like, what if we could do that in mass? What if we could do that all over the place? What if God's people could be the moral conscience of Christ everywhere?
I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in this age as Christians, or just people in general, is we have fallen for the pretense of neutrality.
Sure.
That there is such a thing as neutrality in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And I think Zach said it the best, right? I mean, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. And I think complacency is one of the biggest destroyers that we bring upon ourselves in today's age as Christians.
Yeah, when we don't think that our message matters or our life matters or people will be fine on their own without us, getting involved in our life, I think, the multiplied violence is an indication. No, that's not true.
Or just, hey, hold what we have.
Yeah.
Because
that's
it's the end time is
Yeah,
coming
that's
anyway.
so dangerous. Like
Right.
the church is a bunker, right?
Yeah.
Like all the
There you
Christians
go.
get in the church, don't get involved in your community, and as we withdraw from our communities, then we're surprised that
Sure.
things like this happen. I'm not saying that we're the ones to blame, but if we're pulling away from our communities and not being a part of that,
We're not
then
helping.
what's out there in the community propagating the gospel message and propagating the love of Christ and propagating true like love for people and the lives of people? Well, that's what that's the mission that God gave the church, right? Like, go get the gospel out, be in your communities, propagate morals and fundamental things that you will find in a Bible believing church. But to your point, Kyle, I think we've spent, X amount of years, decades, maybe longer, kind of withdrawing from that because we're so close to the end times. No, we should be getting out there even more so as the day approaches, not
Right.
kind of going back into our churches and withdrawing from that.
Right. The gospel is offensive.
Right.
It is offensive. It's not a defensive model. And if we take a defensive model, necessarily we're not going to go out. I was reading a post from a preacher, I don't know how long ago, but it did make me sad when he said, I pray. He was lamenting that there was a needle in his parking lot, in his church parking lot, and that his neighborhood was going sideways, and he said, I wish it weren't like this. I pray that God would send us. This is what he said: send us the right people. In that post, and in a sense, you sympathized with the guy, but on the other side, you're going about it all wrong. It's not. It's not you hosting church and then just people like coming in. The church is to mobilize your people and take the
Mm-hmm.
gospel out. And it doesn't have to be in these Billy Graham crusades. And maybe that's it. I don't really know, but really it's just the people maybe that you work with. Kyle's going to be a little bit different from you because you work in Dallas. And like, hey, would you come to church with me and drive an hour and a half?
So you're
N-
saying there's a
yeah.
chance.
but for the most of us, I mean, like we can get out there and invite people to church. I don't know how many people I invite to church, but it's a lot, and I get shut down all the time. But
Same.
it doesn't stop me from trying.
It doesn't mean you stop doing it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's exactly right. And or it doesn't stop me. Well, I'm kind of displaced in my home situation right now, but it doesn't stop me when I get my home situation squared away. I'm gonna have dinners again. I'm gonna have people coming to my home again. I can't wait to be more hospitable again when my situation changes. But it's really that easy. If you really want to make a difference, the gospel really will make a difference. If
Yeah.
you don't want to see multiplied violence, then multiply your efforts to let God's gospel do what it does best, and that is change people from the inside out. And then you will see an outward change in the culture.
Kyle said before we started that he doesn't want to get into trying to politicize it, and I'm
It's
gonna
so
go
hard.
I'm gonna go a little political for just a second, because I think as Christians it's easy for us to say, well, look at our government. Look at our government. Why can't we need to get the right elected officials into place? Well, I challenge that thought process. You need to get your churches in your communities, right? And change your communities. And then your communities will elect different officials that
Sure.
reflect the values of the community. And then those officials will go out and actually represent the voice of your community. But don't be upset with politics when you're not getting out into your community to change your community.
Or that people would be raised up in your church and they would be the community leaders.
Right.
How awesome
Yeah.
would that be?
Well, I think we have a false understanding of how it operates or how it should operate, right? I think a lot of people think it's like, upside down pyramid, right? It comes federal government down to you, when in reality, I think it should operate as, individual, family, church, community, local government, state government, federal,
Yep.
right? It should
Yep.
start in the home. If you take it a step further than that, in your church, right? Like Zach said, that people in the church would be lifted up and God led into these roles of leadership in the community, and then onward. I mean, that's how you
Yeah.
affect change.
Yeah. Yeah, we. Yeah, I don't know. We, honestly, I mean, besides praying for the families, we're not going to be able to do much about Alan, but we can do something here, right?
Yeah.
And that's the point. We look out there, and really what that should tell us is that we need to get busy here, right where God has us. And I think we can maybe quell the amount of evil that we see in our sphere. Maybe we would be that hot location. I get because again, where the gospel cools down, where where God's people don't stand up, evil stands in,
Yeah.
and you will see it multiplying. So that's a kind of a hard question to answer, but it's only hard because it just depends on what God's people will do.
Right. And I think that makes complete sense to me. One of the other questions that I saw as well was, do we think that, you know, this is a type of punishment for America because there may be a concept that we've turned our backs, on a God-centric, beginnings of this nation.
Well, and that's a fair question. I think Romans 1 would probably answer that best. That you read that God gave them up to their own devices. They gave them up to a reprobate mind. And so one of the scariest punishments that God could ever give us is giving us exactly what we've always wanted. Like we push against it, push against it, pushed against it, and finally God says, "All right, have at it." And we get what we want, but we lose a lot doing it. If if that is a
Yeah.
simplistic way, it's God's punishment, sure, but it's just Him taking the back door that we wanted Him in the first place. I mean, I'm talking about culturally,
Right.
Yeah.
and so that is the judgment.
I think that's one of those cases again where we look and we perceive this punishment either in our lives or on a national level that, oh, God's punishing us because we're not where we should be as a country. Well, to Zach's point, a lot of times the things that we perceive as punishment is us stepping outside of this bubble of God's protection, right? And if you're not going to be obedient to God, then that places you outside of His protection. And that goes at a personal level, and that goes at a country level. Like if you're deciding to not keep to the values that the country was founded on and saying, hey, we're gonna keep these tenets of our founding as representative of what we are as a country. When you start shutting that stuff down, then you're stepping outside of the protection that we've had for hundreds of years as a country, and we're saying, we kind of don't need that anymore. And then we're up in arms when
Sure.
we're not experiencing that protection
Yeah,
anymore. Like,
where's our
what
blessing?
what happened is
Yeah.
why has God left us? Like,
Yeah.
God didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
God didn't go anywhere. He's the same person He's always been and the same God that He's always been. But He provides protection to those that want to be obedient to Him and those that seek after Him. And
Correct.
if we're not doing that as a people, and we're not doing that as a country, well,
What would
what's
we
going to
expect?
get better?
Yeah, I had a mentor. Uh, he went on like Serengeti things in Africa, and one of my favorite stories that he ever told was when they were camping out in the middle of the Serengeti, and they didn't have any fences. They didn't have anything around them to protect them. They just had like an orb light, like right in the middle of the camp. And that one orb, that light, was what was going to keep everybody safe, which is kind of crazy. Like I feel like I'd be sleeping with,
Well, I'd be right at the base of that pole, whatever
yeah,
that orb's. I'd be there.
I'd be like on top
Yeah, I'd
of
be-
the orb.
yep.
and the guide said, I'm not your babysitter. You can do whatever you want. Uh, w- y- uh, I'm not here to watch you. You can walk around if you want. He said, but I will warn you, the further away that you get away from this light, the darker it's going to get outside. He's like, and I've got to warn you. There's a great big kitty out there that's going to start looking at you like you're fast food. And he said, I got news for you. You ain't that fast. And if you put a spiritual application on that, what does Peter say about Satan? That he is a what? A roaring lion,
Lion.
walking around seeking whom he may devour. God has given the light of His Word, right? And God said you can walk away from the light. You can, but the further you get away from me, the darker it's going to get outside. And so what does God's Word say? There's a great big kitty out there that's going to start looking at you like you're fast food. And when it comes between you and the devil, you and Satan, I got news for you. You ain't that fast.
Yeah.
You're done.
But we are not done with the conversation, folks. We encourage you to tune in next week. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this conversation with our pastor on just the troubled times that we live in and provide some additional answers. You're not going to want to miss it next week. Tune in for the conclusion, and we'll finish this plunge in the thinking well.